Hey everybody, my name is Masterofroflness, and 2018 is finally over. We're getting into 2019. It's about time we finally get into the meat of things, figure out which is the best of the best that have come out in 2018 in terms of strategy games, mostly focusing on RTS, but because of the sheer drought of games that have been released this year, I mean released, not on early access, I mean fully released 1.0, it's going to be a fairly short list, so you know what, kick back and relax, because we've got ourselves here about 7? Jesus Christ, no, 8 top 8 strategy games of 2018. Thank you. Jesus. At the number 8 slot, we got BattleTech. Now, BattleTech is a turn-based strategy mech game, so it's a lot of good things already wrapped up in there. Adding to the fact that this mech game allows you to customize the formation of your mechs as well as the individual parts at some levels, like the armaments that this mech is attached to when it involves the different variants of said mech. It's very interesting, very detailed, and something that really interested me a lot as well in the game was the approach to the line of sight, the combat as well. It's very much a case of, this isn't completely like tile based, this is more like your unit is moving around in this set amount of space. He has about this amount of time, and then afterwards he can engage in a multitude of actions. He can jump jet, he can overstrike, he can use abilities, he can melee attack, and because of the factor that you're always juggling between utilizing your full armament of weapons as well as your power supply, so if you use too much of your weapons without like cooling off, so to speak, with an action point, then you will actually occur an overheating penalty that'll happen to your mech, and that could cause it to become weak to enemy fire as well as take damage yourself. So it's all that combined to make things a lot more fluid in terms of the combat system. Like, you're not in a case of you can unleash everything and then that's about it, a turn, or you can only do one thing. You have so many options to choose from. You can go all in, use all of your weapons, but then afterwards have a dangerous level of overheating that could cause you, if you're reckless, to lose your mech, or at least like lose some health from your mech. So overall, choices like that in this game are what I really liked. I really like the choices in this game involved. Obviously this isn't really my forte, as this is a turn-based strategy game, so not really my cup of tea, but the fact that there are giant mechs that can fight other mechs is pretty darn cool, honestly. And the way that the mechs just sort of like melee attack each other, the animations involved are fantastic. Actually, the modular damage of the mechs is also a big thing. I love modular damage. Like in Dead Space, rip off the leg comes off, rip off the arm comes off. This is the same thing, really. You shoot out the arm goes off. Took a little bit of time to get around there, but essentially, what it comes down to it is BattleTech is really good for mech-on-mech combat. I didn't play a lot with the campaign, but from what I saw, I really did like the art that was going into at least the cinematic portraits of it. I wish I had done maybe some videos on the cinematic, but at the time, this was personal tangent, just didn't want to do campaigns for RTS games. So maybe next time I won't be so stubborn all the time, especially with the new expansion packs that have come out for the game. Regardless though, I do like mech games, but I do definitely prefer some real-time aspect for it. Otherwise, let's go into another turn-based strategy game, Into the Breach. Into the Breach, this is something that's really interesting. Whereas BattleTech is more of mech combat, it's more mechs versus kaijus, and this is definitely more of my forte. If I had to choose between the two, I do love the whole asymmetric warfare that goes on. You have your selection of units that you could choose from, and you get different types of them as you go along the game, as you unlock more and more of them. And these units would have different attributes and abilities, allowing them to pull off different, I suppose, like maneuvers and actions against these massive, large, like engagements you have with these kaijus, who very much overwhelm you very fast. Though it's compensated by the fact that they have like specific weaknesses and disabilities that could cause them to basically become weak in certain engagements. So for example, if you have a tank unit, right, he has a projectile that not only does damage but pushes a enemy unit. So you can push a land unit into water and basically insta kill him. And it's like those type of maneuvers in the gameplay that make it very fresh. Also, the sheer fact that you're protecting civilians in this like roguelike game, it's not necessarily a case of this is your party you're keeping alive. It's more of a case of you need to protect these civilians, you need to complete this action. And it's a lot of it is you could very well do perfectly, but if you fail, it's not going to be like the end of the game. You will have to just keep working on those mistakes over and over again. And well, the game definitely does get harder and harder and becomes way more challenging. I did find myself like really enjoying the difficulty of it actually. But I didn't also really like the fact that it was very I suppose I really wanted more multiplayer action for the game as well, because I did like the combat on the base level, but it really only had like one way to truly play it, so I wasn't really too keen on it. But that makes sense. That's the whole point of the game. It's just essentially just a roguelike where you're going through the campaign over and over and over again. But I suppose in comparison to what I felt like to be other rogue games, especially since these are the makers of FTL that created this, I definitely felt like maybe there could have been a lot more being put into the game. I definitely want more content. That's what I want. I want more content from the game, really. And especially since they've got like so many different kaiju types. I would just love to see what happens in terms of like the different mechs, the different environments that they can create in new DLC. I'm not really sure, but when it comes down to it, I'm really ecstatic for at least these developers, because they do create like a really well crafted games time and time again. But this however, at least for me at the very case, I definitely found myself getting bored with the content available for Into the Breach, at least for the type that I was being presented. Now whether this change would happen later down the line and I see the game way better in subsequent playthroughs, I'll definitely update that or whatever, and I'll show that off in like videos that I do make for it. But regardless, that'll be it for Into the Breach. Next we get on to Age of Empires Definitive Edition. Alright, Age of Empires Definitive Edition I've played quite a lot of. I've played a few of the factions, from the Assyrians to the Persians and the Japanese, and it really is just a remake of Age of Empires 1, but I feel like after seeing some videos on the game, as well as, you know, playing the game myself, it did feel very disappointing actually in a lot of areas, because for one hand it was a remake, but it also wasn't at the same time in some cases, in terms of just like having like basic utilities for a game. It just kind of was lacking actually. And then for me at least, if you're gonna remake a game, I feel like the best way to combine both of those aspects is to take like new stuff, new content at least, in the form of like graphics support and support for like modern resolutions and all that stuff, while keeping intact the gameplay. But I don't know, I was just not a total fan of how they did this remake actually. But overall, the Age of Empires gameplay is still solid. From what I played in the skirmish games at the very least, the multiplayer was extremely laggy, but the skirmish games are quite fun, and I'm still like enjoying my time against the AI. It's nothing like the Age of Empires 2 AI, unfortunately. And it does seem like there's no more support being given to this game. It's just released as is. But I really love the content that was available. It's just a shame that there's no more content being given to it like it has been beforehand in their previous remake of Age of Empires 2, which I guess they're remaking again with a remaster of Age of Empires 2, which I hope they did learn at least a lot from this one on having like a proper multiplayer before you know, the beta is released, or at least the game is released as well. But if you love Age of Empires, you're gonna love this game. I had a blast playing this because I love Age of Empires 1. A lot of my criticisms of this are basically down to the way that they handled this remaster. But as a game, as Age of Empires 1, it's still Age of Empires 1, so it is great. You can just grab it, but it does beg the question sometimes. Maybe just grabbing Age of Empires 1 would just be suffice actually at some level, especially since you could play that maybe easier online with just like Game Ranger. But anyway, let's get on to Empires Apart.
We interrupt this program to bring you...
Hey, what's up guys, Masterofroflness here, and if you enjoy the type of content that I do and love to see videos on my channel, then consider supporting me on Patreon or donating down in the link below. YouTube's always copyright claiming my videos or taking down my videos.
Stupid dog! You made me look bad!
Empires Apart. So this is a very interesting game. I've seen like it develop over time, and essentially it's an RTS game that is now free to play but initially wasn't. And this game essentially has you playing as civilizations with a lot more uniqueness to them. They have more unique abilities, more unique units, completely unique leaders apart from each other and stuff. And their bonuses and technologies would kind of reflect that. So for example, you would have Aztecs who would develop technologically with their units based on how many units they would hurt and kill. Like it's quite interesting, some of the ideas that they had going on for some of these factions, as well as the unique units being given out. But I feel like the huge problem that I had with this game came late with the AI. The AI was quite terrible actually, especially playing now. The AI does nothing at all. So virtually the only way to play and have a good challenge would be to play the campaign or any single player with a more directive, or just going into the multiplayer. And really that's the huge problem there, is the fact that there's a lack of offline support, and now it's become free to play. So obviously because of the free to play aspect, it gives it a lot more easiness to it, because you can just try it out yourself right now, play as the Byzantines, which that's the whole gimmick. As the free to play model, you have a free faction, and then you have to pay for the rest of the factions. Now I personally don't think this is fair, because this is just basically paying for power, but just right down to the level. But they do have like some interesting ways to pay for stuff. I was really laughing my ass off at the fact that I had a Korean civilization with a snowman face and hat. That's funny, that's good, but like paying for Korea or Arabia is pretty oof. It's pretty oof. But now that's essentially what the game is at. You have their skirmish game with a flawed AI, and then you have multiplayer, which unfortunately is dead as of this moment. If you want to, try out Empires Apart yourself and see what you can garner from this. But that'll be it. That'll be it for Empires Apart. I put it above all the other guys because two of them were a turn-based strategy game, and one of them was a remaster of a classic, which I felt like didn't really need to exist. So we get up now to the 5. No, actually 4. I cannot count. The 4 that I think are personally worthy of your attention, actually. Yeah, this is a really small list, but for now we get on to a real good RTS, and that would be Ancestors Legacy. This is a historical real-time strategy game in which you play as 4 factions: the Vikings, the Anglo-Saxons, the Germans, and the Slavs. And in this sort of scenario, you can play with them, raiding, conquering villages throughout medieval Europe. So I played the beta of this, I played the full release, and I quite like, first of all, the whole setting. I'm a big history fetish, honestly. Love the whole aspect of learning about different cultures and learning about the histories of these people. And for a long time, I felt like Total War definitely had that historical strategy game reign, as well as like the old classics, obviously. Now we finally have Ancestors Legacy, finally doing a part of the world that you don't really see a lot of, the Vikings, but also Anglo-Saxons, Germans, and Slavs, and at least like how... I'll be right back. Where was I? So essentially it is a very I wouldn't want to say very good retelling of these events, as I am not a historian in this area of the world at all, or really just anything, but when it comes down to at least the historical authenticity, how the game feels, it's trying to be as realistic as possible, especially with the graphics on display. Buildings set on fire, people are mauled and maimed, and gore is just all over the place. It's a very bloody game, actually. This is the guys who made I think Hatred, actually. So you can see that there when the swords just really rip and tear into flesh. And all 4 of the factions have very good distinctive features about them. Unfortunately, I feel like they should have went really all in and maybe added in some other factions that were way farther out, increasing the scope of it. But it is good that it's a tightly knit package, you know. So there is a campaign involved, and there is also multiplayer involved, so you have a lot of content with this. The skirmish, the AI is fairly competent, so you have a very competently well made and very beautiful game on a historical setting that doesn't really get shown off that well. And I haven't even talked about the gameplay. It's very reminiscent of Company of Heroes. You have squads of medieval units that you use to fight against each other. So archers shoot, swordsmen slice, spearmen stab, you know, that sort of stuff. You have axemen who are good at this unit, slingers who are good against that unit, siege weapons, horsemen, the works really. It's quite actually a fantastic fucking game, if I do say so. Just a shame that I personally didn't cover this as much. Again, I didn't cover the campaign as much, really just only research for this video, so I do hope that I can at least change that aspect about myself. And well, if you guys definitely want stuff like a strategy game with historical flair, look no further than Ancestors Legacy if you really just want combat. For Ancestors Legacy 2, Jesus, I would choose a completely different area. If they're willing to just do like a small section of land, I would say do like Southeast Asia, you know, or like South India. Somewhere where, you know, you have a lot of cultures intersecting, but there's frequent raids between the different groups. Like, you can really go crazy with that. Or maybe even the Crusades, where it was a free-for-all, sluggish affair between multiple different factions. But anyway, let's get on to the next game. Badnor. I like Badnor. Badnor is a really good game. It feels satisfying to defend these islands time and time again in this RTS roguelike game. You're defending your beaches against wave and wave of Viking attackers. Each deck can come across your island that you're defending with different armaments that could basically destroy you. They're coming at you with 8, 9, 14 longships constantly at you, and really the only thing at your disposal that you can fight against them would be the troops that you kept alive along your roguelike journey, upgrading them along the way, while also picking up more troops to continue on your journey. And in this journey map, you're going between different areas, choosing either to go to this area or go to that area for either more loot or maybe an alternate path to see like where you can go in order to escape this never-ending threat that looms on the horizon. Much like FTL, you have to choose the paths that you take, and Badnor, like Into the Breach, is very much about that, except this is more of an RTS, very much more of an RTS than Into the Breach. It does have a slowdown and a pause mechanic, but that's really about it, nothing more than that. And the on-the-fly decisions you have to make while being surrounded by never-ending hordes of Vikings is quite amazing. The only way to really like replenish your troops is by keeping the very houses alive that you're trying to protect. So if you do not basically keep your troops alive while also keeping your houses alive in tandem, it's just that level of you having to balance out between engaging these enemy troops and also being able to keep your troops alive while whittling them down. I think for this game, it's very addicting to just have to be able to consistently be able to outweigh and manage the time that you need in order to defend against this force that at times would be completely insurmountable, actually, with the resources that you are given. But because of like things like the pause mechanic and all that stuff and slowdown, you're able to really like digest the situation that is happening, and you're able to act accordingly. Much in the same way as Europa Universalis. It's a Europa Universalis game. It's basically a Europa Universalis game. But I guess like one thing that really keeps it away from it is the fact that because this is a roguelike game, the diversity in what is on display. So for example, if like you wanted the empire management of an RTS game or a strategy game or the economy management, you're not going to get that with Badnor. You're just going to get pure raw action. Ancestors Legacy is also the same way, you know, in the way that there's very little to care about in economy. It's mostly on combat, and this is, both these games are very true of that. With the exception that Ancestors, there is an economy system, you just upgrade and then leave it alone. Badnor just does away with it. Instead, you just sort of survive between different islands, so your own skill is determined based on how your economy does, which is basically a very good thing, but that is determined based on if you can keep these villages alive from these Viking invasions. So if you don't like killing Vikings constantly, it would probably be a very boring game. But if you love a game with a huge amount of challenge attached to it, while you're also protected or trying to protect yourself against waves and waves of attackers, I think badnor is really the game for that. Frostpunk. I really love Frostpunk. Frostpunk is a survival winter strategy game in which you're tasked with surviving this post-apocalyptic Snowpiercer-esque world where you are basically a group of survivors huddled together around a generator trying to stay warm, and that is so bleak and so depressing. It's just the tip of the iceberg, honestly. You're having to do things like leave the disabled out to die in the frozen wilderness, trying to institute religious or police states in your territory, also like making decisions on whether or not you should have this group of people live in your city or not, opposing sides being executed, you know, just the usual sort of business. And I quite enjoyed my time with it, like creating a religious theocracy to sort of huddle around the shelters in order to stay warm against the never-ending blizzards, which goddamn, it gets cold in Frostpunk. It gets like negative 80 degrees Celsius. Things are frozen completely, and you have to protect yourself against all manner of craziness. Really, also at the end of the day, you're also combining this like steampunk-esque like universe. You have like automatons that will walk around the wilderness and gather resources for you, or you could just send out like droves and droves of hundreds of civilians to just cater to and create and gather these resources that are left on the wasteland, like frozen trees and coal in the area and stuff. It's quite amazing the amount of hard choices you have to make on your city to reject survivors who are trying to come to your generator for shelter and stuff. It's really unfortunate, actually. You do sort of get the sense of feeling that you are a beacon of hope, and the amount of scenarios and challenges on display allow you to have a sense, or a taste rather, of what is to come from the game. You can really choose the different ways and different paths that you can have to survive, choosing a police state or choosing a bureaucracy, or just trying to just survive, just focusing on raw survival, creating triages and sex shops and fighting arenas for your populace just to stay around. I would have loved to see a lot more choices. I think 5 or 6 would have been really good for just replayability, but for what's on offer, I really did love the whole aesthetic of Frostpunk, being in this raw and terrible situation, really. And it's just mostly an empire management game, or a city management game. You're managing your resources, you're managing the health and happiness of the populace, you're managing your civilians, be they children that you're sending out to work, be they adults, engineers, so even more qualified adults, be they hunters or elderly, disabled, you know, that sort of stuff. Just really just a large amount of populace to really like go through, because at first it starts off very small, but later on you're having to turn down groups of survivors that just want to live in your territory. It's quite sad, actually. And you know, the fact that you're bouncing around this one resource that is coal the entire time, trying to stay alive, keeping the generator afloat, while also upgrading everything, making things better and better. It's a very depressing atmosphere, but when you finally get over that blizzard hurdle, I gotta say, it's a very rewarding and very satisfying feeling. Though, I definitely did wish that half my populace didn't die in that process as well. But let's get on to the last number 1. In the last slot, the first slot, we got ourselves Northgard, a RTS Viking fantasy strategy game. This game I've had a lot of fun with. I've played a lot of the factions, and I've played some of the different game modes, and essentially it goes without saying that this is my favorite, as it combines the empire management of some real-time strategy games, the full economic sort of development and juggling between military combat and exploration. It's a 4X Viking game in a lot of ways. You play as one of many Viking clans, each with their different strengths and weaknesses. There's already 2 on DLC, and you've got stuff like the boar, the snake, the dragon, the wolf. It's really cool stuff, actually. And then afterwards you got a tech tree where it's divided up into different categories, as well as a separate military tech tree that's divided up into different categories, allowing for a lot more flexibility. And there's different win conditions for this game. You can either tech up, get the technological victory, you can get a diplomatic victory, you can get an aggressive victory, you can do a bunch of things. There's actually a lot of in-game sort of territories for you to grab to gain control over the battlefield, especially when it comes to certain like objects and resources that are very unique to that area. So the game is all about you balancing out, managing your village, while also expanding out and defeating your opponents in these different victory categories. So essentially, what it comes down to is you fighting with your opponent over these territories and stuff. And with this comes your villagers. Now, they can be given multiple different jobs based on the buildings they're assigned to. If they're assigned by default, they're just civilians gathering resources in your territory. But if you assign them to a job like a brewery, for example, a raider job, like a sailor specific job, so that guy's only job is to raid or pillage territories for fame and glory. You have miners, you have hunters, that sort of good stuff. And then the military units are the same way, where your unique units as well as the units that you can transform the villagers into armed men and women are all in a separate tab as well, all separated. And these villagers that you keep alive that are helping up your economy, they're also your military that you can send out. So there are periods where you can hire out new warriors to fight for you, as well as to go on raids and also to harvest for resources. And eventually, as the game goes on, you're dealing with winter scenarios, you're dealing with special ghosts attacking you, enemy raids, enemy player raids, for example, just random neutral monsters, and even in this new update, a Ragnarok mode that basically has random molten rock sort of reanimate, come to life, and beat the shit out of you. It's quite fantastic, actually. The amount of content on display, the amount of ways that you can win, and as well as customize your civilization. There's a single player aspect, there's a damn good multiplayer aspect, and there's a lot of like uniqueness to the game. Now, with this DLC with the singular factions, I'm kind of fine with, especially since it's only 2, and in addition to that, it's not the entire roster of the factions being paid to win. Albeit, I do think that the Dragon faction is very powerful, so it may be sort of that case of they're just a very powerful faction you're going to be dealing with. But regardless, Northgard is a very interesting game. You got yourselves not only the resources to balance out food, wood, gold, but you also have fame, which correlates with bonuses and stuff that are given to you based on what deeds you accomplish, like areas you explore, expand into, fight against, that sort of stuff. And the lore mechanic, which is the standard tech mechanic, right, where you're going to areas and you're gathering up lore points in order to get to different tech levels, is also interesting because you can raid areas for more tech, thus speeding up your advancement or technology game through raiding. It's really excellent, and just like, you know, these random things that could screw up your village, like winter just setting in, just like destroying your food production to a halt, is very interesting. It creates a raw feeling of everything just coming crashing down after having your shit together. You can be on like a good swing of things, but once winter hits, you're just kind of fucked. And I like that feeling in this game. I like the multiplayer of it, and I do really like the hard choices that come with managing up this economy propped up by villagers that can also be your military units. It really feels like a breathed in world, and it's a fantasy Viking game. So if you like Viking fantasy, there's a lot of homages to that, like Thor's anvil or some of the creatures and monsters that you're going to be fighting against. I especially prefer and do suggest you play on the Ragnarok mode. That way you can experience the same attacks that were occurring to me. But anyway, that'll be it for my review list, so to speak. We will get on to 2019 soon enough once more games start rolling around, and I'll probably have that around in January. But see you guys next time, and bye-bye.